Okay, well, my story about STS in Russia will be bitter and sweet. Bitter in the beginning, hopefully sweet in the end. Well, basically there was an institution which was supposed to be doing STS in Russia by designation. And that was called RAN, or in English, the Institute for the History of Natural Sciences and Technology of the Russian Academy of Sciences. That institution employed, I think, about 200 people in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they did lots of studies of history of physics and chemistry and engineering, and that was the story all the way through the 70s and the 80s, at least, the way we remember it. Now, what happened, of course, in the 90s is that when funding for science collapsed, the Institute almost stopped its activities. There are some people doing something in old-fashioned history of science. There's some sociology of science, of which Mikhail would be more knowledgeable. I never saw these people producing results which would reach the international audience. And the current reform right now is spearheaded by Anatoly Chubais, the big reformer who wants to get this institute back and running. So Chubais recently helped appoint a new director, whose name is Yuri Baturin. He's a former cosmonaut. But actually what is more important, he is a legal scholar, and he was an advisor to Yeltsin on governmental reform. I know the guy since the 80s, when he was the only Russian specialist on information society and legal use and regulation of information technology, so he's a very worthwhile person. I also remember him as the only lawyer I knew who wrote on Vladimir Vysotsky poetry and the legal analysis of Vladimir Vysotsky poetry also, which is like the local hero, not of the rock movement, but of the Bard movement. Now, but Baturin right now, being such an intelligent and good person, is just trying right now to get the building back, which the institute lost, and to install back the financial discipline. So we do not have much going on in that area. So what did we have in the 90s? In the 90s, I was not doing STS, and others were not as well, but there was, thank God, one person from that institute for the study of the history of natural sciences and technology. His name was Daniel Alexandrov, and he moved from that institution, which was at the time losing money, to us, which was pretty rich in the 90s in comparison to the state universities. And he brought the graduate students topics for study. They established the Center for Technological and Ecological History here. This center still exists and it's very active. They ran summer schools, and I'm pretty sure that that's when Trevor came here for the first time. That's when Peter Gallison was here, though nobody at the time knew who Peter Gallison was, at least in Russia. And I remember also Reinberger and possibly Dustin telling me that they were in the summer schools. They hardly had any impact on a broader community of Russian scholars of science, but they were good for at least influencing some graduate students to take these topics. It's just that these topics were mostly in the history rather than sociology of science. The best study I know is my favorite. It's called Red Herring. Red Herring, which is a place on the words, but it's a study of how the populations of herring have disappeared in Russian North in the White Sea in 1937. And this is the midst of the largest purges in Soviet history. So the question in front of the secret police was, is it willful destruction of herring populations for which somebody should be shot? Or is it the fluctuation, natural fluctuation in the natural populations of fishes? And it's the most fascinating study, but that's the type of stuff they've been producing, which is simultaneously political and ecological and technological. It's not as fancy as Michel Calon and his Coquille Saint-Jacques, I mean the Saint-Brieuc Bay and the scallops, but it comes close. Now, there was also something which was more traditional. That was the Laboratory for Science and Technology Studies in the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. But they mostly engaged in what Russians call naukometria or scientometrics, or the measurement of scientific development. Mikhail, once again, will correct me if I'm wrong. He's more familiar with the work, but I didn't see much STS coming from that lab. Now, it so happened that in 2005 we published the first translation of a major work of STS, though it's not the Latour Vulgar volume, which we are translating right now, by the way. We might be translating right now. The person who was here during the daytime, he just went back to his kids. He has half of it already in his bookshelf, translated for his own pleasure. So we have to just finish it, and then it will be out if we buy the copyright from the publishers for translation. But at the time we just translated Latour's We Have Never Been Modern, and the idea was to make a splash, in a sense, in the local science, social science scene. And as Bruno advised me when we were doing that, just do the title as glitzy as you can, as glossy and glitzy as you can. So in Russian it sounds the modernity never happened, or the modern times never arrived, actually. Even worse than in English. The result was that there were some interest to Latour, but it was more a development in interest in social theory rather than an interest in STS itself. It so happened that I was a Gastarbeiter at Harvard when he was a Gastarbeiter at Harvard. I was teaching political science department and he was teaching in history of science department. And it so happened that our paths crossed, and I decided that the most popular book among political theorists, which was We Have Never Been Modern, should be translated into Russian, and that's how we all kind of got into that. But thank God, all of this glitzy and glossy stuff in translating the fashionable book by Latour produced some research agendas. That is, the first one was that we got some graduate students who took on some topics for their research and dissertations. And we also did some research with Finnish colleagues. Well, those of you who were here last year from among our international colleagues know about the study of мобильный телефон, mobile phone, and its use by Russian youth. We also did a book which appeared in Routledge in 2010 in English and still not published in Russian. Hopefully it will by the summer of this year, on the transformation of utility networks in the Russian urban reform. And that's when we did a study where Latour and Calon were of no help at all. It turned out to be they don't study huge ferrous metallic infrastructure anymore. Madeleine Ackridge, I mean, the only one who did some electricity, is not doing that as well. But that was the type of thing which was important here, because that was not changed for a number of years. And then, well, you know Anna by now, who did a study, a comparison between a Russian and American biological lab, having spent fieldwork both in St. Petersburg and then in New York. What happened simultaneously in Moscow in the 2000s? The guy who left because he has some urgent business, with whom the story, the anecdote I was telling about the STS summer school and how there were the ethnographers and sociologists on one hand and the deep theorists on the other, Victor Wachstein, he published in 2006 a compilation of essays which was very important. In Russian it's called The Sociology of Things. And basically it introduced ANT into Russian parlance as a special field. It had translations of Latour, John Law and others. It started nicely with Zimmel, of course. So basically that was the thing which opened the field to Russians, and they started reading and reflecting whether the Lancaster school of ANT is different from the Paris School of A&T, where there's A&T and after. At least the discourse was also being produced on theoretical terms, not only in fieldwork. Victor by now has a number of students in Moscow School for Social and Economic Sciences who do also A&T studies. We listened to them during our summer school 6 months ago. And some of you came also to a conference organized by Higher School of Economics by Olga Stolярova, who ran a philosophical conference in October 2008, which was basically the first big gathering bringing international scholars, but mostly doing the philosophy of science rather than STS. A spin-off was a small workshop here when I guess Andy, Trevor, and Harry Collins came to basically look at what ethnographies we were doing. That's when we decided that it's worth continuing, and we should regroup the ranks and produce a hub of these activities. Now, what would be the future agenda? Well, of course, the presence of the foundation and the Future Institute for Science and Technology in Skolkovo changes the scene in Russia, in that right now everybody understands that there should be some reflections on the engineers and their links to business. Skolkovo does not have the same concern as other big Russian corporations like Rosnano or Russian venture company. These two corporations are all concerned that there's no what they call ecosystem of technological entrepreneurship, meaning they have given out initial seed grants to all the businesses they could find who could be developing nano or high-tech businesses, and right now who's in the second ranks, and they don't find much. So the questions which they are asking is not what Skolkovo is asking, but rather how to create this culture of entrepreneurship from the student days, of which MIT is famous. Like when students go into garage in the second or third years of their undergraduate studies. But Skolkovo, together with these corporations like Rosnano and Russian venture company, they have transformed at least the discourse in the country, which made once again science an interesting endeavor, both intellectually and financially. People started to believe that engineering, startups, and technological entrepreneurship does not only bring some intellectual reward, but also might be lucrative, and the government might help. Because up until now, businesses were getting rich in getting licenses for oil experts, like in the 90s, or getting paybacks by servicing certain people in the government who would give them contracts. Kickbacks, I mean. Yeah, so that was far more easier than doing technological entrepreneurship, so people were not very much engaged in technological entrepreneurship until now. But in terms of science, what does the situation when Skolkovo is there, Rosnano is there, and Russian venture company is there? I think that us as representatives of the East STS field, we can at least claim that there's a specific research and a very unique research situation that has been formed as a result of the 20 years of very low investment into R&D in Russia, particularly in basic science and in basic science as well. STS usually studies progress. It usually studies how facts get solidified, how they carried across one network into another. What we saw here was actually not the entanglement of the networks, but disentanglement of the networks. We saw regress rather than progress. And I don't know how many regress STS has ever studied. It studied the failures, for sure, like the study by Low and Cologne of TSR-2, the military aircraft, or the study of Aramis by Latour, why the private cars in airports did not develop. But it never studied regress because such field for fieldwork did not exist. And here you had 20 years of demolition. Non-intentional, perhaps, but still, when science was disintegrating. Where else can you study the black boxes of science unraveling rather than here. And the black box is черный ящик, not okay. Да, нет, я не про то, что я в прошлый раз, да, sorry. So in a sense that Russia represented a socially lamentable but scientifically very interesting case for a study of the process of the disassembling of these networks of technoscience. And this already has happened. And it's bad that it's happened to this country, which prided itself on scientific achievement. It's bad that we have most achievements in non-capital intensive science right now. We still have theoretical physics, we still have math, which is very cool, and we have lots of people like us, sociologists, because we don't need much experimental equipment. And we have very few achievements where expensive equipment is entailed. So that's why Russia has witnessed almost the total collapse of the natural sciences when they are linked with experimentation. And right now they are pumping in the money to do the either refurbish this equipment or to create it anew. There's a big new government initiative which spends about 5 million on new grants per each laboratory which wins the grant to re-establish chemistry, physics, nuclear stuff, biology. They distributed 40 grants, 5 million each in 2010. They distributed 39 grants and the total I think is about $140 million for that new initiative, and it was mostly hard sciences. Only one economist has won among the social scientists. We applied with Trevor and Steve, and sociologists always lose the competition with economists, so we didn't get our 5 million. We were second in line after the economists got it. But the story is not about us, it's about that the government right now wants to put some money into experimental science, thinking that it will recreate at least some former splendor of Russian experimental science, while our point right now is very simple, and that is STS is actually what Oleg Genisaretsky has noticed. It has some style and activism in it, and it might be that style and activism is already gone, or kind of it's a bit worn off after 30 years of trying to do something radical in Western Europe and United States. Here it suddenly has a promise, and the promise is very simple. There were vast misfortunes which happened to science in this country and to technology in this country. But given the overabundance of empirical data on destruction of what happened here, and it's already happened, so we can take this as the empirical basis for new star quality studies, which might be a very good contrast point to what Western Europe and America was studying in terms of progress. And that would be the research agenda, which is an obvious given to those people who do studies of Russian science right now, like Anna, who was sitting in a biological lab in St. Petersburg and looking at all of these people with their meager equipment, 80% of them wishing to get a postdoc right away and go immediately to some US lab or West European lab, because the equipment would be far different. Now, that's the end of my prepared presentation, but what I thought I should add after Artyom's presentation on Skolkovo is where I see right now the promise is not only to turn our misfortunes into a fortune through STS, but rather, until we did a misfortune with Skolkovo, to add the role of sociologists to design the infrastructure of that place. Russia was forced to consider infrastructure in the last 20 years because it had no money to change pipes, wires, And that's why we did the study of infrastructure in Cherepavets and Petersburg. And I was always thinking that we should be producing advice to local water facilities, which we kind of did to St. Petersburg and Cherepavets. But if we are also to take a look at what could be a fruitful type of endeavor, I don't think that STS research on infrastructures of technoparks or technology hubs, or how one fosters the culture of creativity through infrastructural reform, or how one adapts the creativity and infrastructure in multiple adaptations to each other, right? That's what Andy likes. These kind of studies have not been done, and I don't find right now one student who would be immediately pinpointed to go and do a study of what Skolkovo could be looking like as an adapting environment, building infrastructure which is conducive to innovation. But it could be done eventually, and I think that 2 years down the road, and that's what we're thinking of doing with Skolkovo Foundation, we will have at least 3 or 4, hopefully, maybe 5 people who have finished our master's degree in STS and who could be not only doing academic STS, but will be capable of also helping in building good adaptive environments. There's always a question of time lag, and that is hopefully that once again they will not have to deconstruct the misfortunes of Skolkovo already built by 2014. We still have to prepare them so that they contribute, but at least we are starting the discussion right now, and this panel is part of the conversation. And if Oleg Alexeyev has to say something as a commentary or as a response, I will be happy to translate simultaneously. So.
I will say some answers used to translate it.
Окей. Что-то включите.
Я видел несколько мест, которые реализуют концепцию территории как лаборатория.
I have seen several places where a space was turned into a laboratory. It's a live laboratory.
Это может быть всем известный Холенберг или не всем известный провинция Трento на севере Италии.
I mean, take places in the north of Italy, for instance, which probably up at other locations. Trento, Trento, for instance, and others.
Но это означает, что многие люди задумываются над тем, какой результат они получают, когда реализуют такие большие металлоемкие проекты.
But that means that people are actually thinking ahead of the end result that they get as a function of these very comprehensive, complicated projects.
Я, кстати, всем для интереса могу сказать, что в ближайшее время наконец-то состоится встреча фонда Сколково и той компании, которая реализует строительство олимпийских объектов в Сочи. Они нам будут рассказывать о том, что они научились делать. Из того, чего не умел делать никто в нашей стране.
And by the way, very soon we'll have a meeting between Skolkovo Foundation and a construction company that has a church of Olympic Games facility construction in Sochi. So they will share their experience on unique experience pretty much of what we've managed to do, something that's never been done here in Russia and elsewhere in the world. is good for us, this is what we've done, and we don't want to do that, and this is what we'll be doing in the future. And this was a very nice sort of add-on, very nice option, but we won't sleep on that. I think we'll be implementing or not. We're not at that stage yet.
Но, тем не менее, исходя из модели Сколково как лаборатории, у меня есть определенный список задач, результатов, которые нужно было бы получить. Несколько объектов, которые должны быть стать объектами исследования и развития.
But of course, myself is responsible for this. I do have a list of targets, and I need to tick those boxes and things that I need to have enabled in Skol, and those are potential areas of research.
Но прежде чем я их назову, не все заключательные, хотел бы сказать, что есть один вопрос, который задают все и который вы сегодня задавали.
But before I proceed to that list enumeration, I'd like to talk about this question that we are asked many times and it was raised today.
Этот вопрос звучит примерно так. А вы сможете сделать Сколково flexible?
This is about our capability and ability to make Skol that flexible thing.
Ну, что это означает? Ну, вот вы спроектируете, пускай лучшими руками лучших архитекторов мировых этот город и построите.
So, okay, so you involve world's best state-of-the-art architecture specialists. So you build this thing, the city. So what then?
Постройте здание.
Usually you have to see, the buildings, its infrastructure and everything. So
После этого, когда появятся новые потребности.
So what about some new needs that might be in the future that you can't envisage today?
У нас будет возможность его изменять.
So will you be flexible enough to incorporate that and embed that into later stages?
Или в этом смысле он сразу будет мертвым, еще не родившимся.
So we don't want something that is dead or.
Я замечу, что есть и инструменты. Например, наши коллеги считают, что нужно проектировать как общее пространство, как всю территорию, так и отдельные здания, исходя из принципа зонирования.
So, there is a perfect concept of zoning, such as, shared space and any other area of that city should be built with the zoning concept in mind, as an option, for instance.
И теперь и также мы знаем, что если у нас возникнет сообщество, то есть возникнет оно, вероятно, через 20 лет. Но почему через 20 лет? Потому что 20 лет, с моей точки зрения, это минимальный срок, когда появляются границы сообщества.
And of course,
И они начинают воспроизводить.
We'll have a community somewhere in 20 years. It's not a exact date, but on average, that's what it takes for a local community to develop around 20 years.
Поэтому нужно, по крайней мере, чтобы все системы были достаточно подвижны и гибкой в течение 20 лет.
So that means that the system should be flexible enough to sustain itself over the course of 20 years to support the development of the community.
Конечно, можно сказать, что это и есть самая главная инновация, если это удастся, тогда получится все остальное.
If we pull this off, it's a success story. The rest will follow.
Ну, может быть, это и достаточно необоснованные утверждения.
But perhaps I'm just being, reckless in my fantasizing.
Когда я сказал, что зонирование, то, естественно, говорю, зонирование – это же такой взгляд на организацию пространства, который противостоит интердисциплинарности.
Because take the concept of zoning. Zoning means imposing something and that runs counterclockwise to the concept of an interdisciplinary approach.
Но, может быть, это заблуждение, кто должен ответить на этот вопрос.
Or perhaps I'm being delusional and I'm being misled or something like that. I don't know that.
Мы знаем, что это тоже объект нашего исследования, коммерциализация. интердисциплинарность.
So in this case, commercialization equals interdisciplinary approach because these guys have different interests.
Сегодня мы исходим из того, что драйвером этого процесса является предприниматель.
So at the moment, it is the entrepreneurs that are drivers behind this process.
Но, вероятно, это недостаточно обоснованное утверждение, должно быть точно понимать, да, комбинации каких позиций и в каком сочетании обеспечивает наиболее успешную и быструю коммерциализацию.
But I'm not 100% sure of that. I'm not sure that entrepreneurs is the only driver, so we need to know exactly what drivers will be the right mix to ensure sustainable commercialization of this whole enterprise.
Сегодня было несколько примеров, в том числе все очень такие эвристичные примеры по тому, из каких сочетаний таких элементов состоит процесс коммерциализации.
And there were several examples today. Trevor, for instance, had an example about the essential drivers of successful commercialization.
Потом это взаимодействие основных элементов экосистемы. Мы сегодня смотрим на эту экосистему институционально и говорим, какие основные институты будут присутствовать, вероятно, в скобках. И набор этих институтов иногда выглядит довольно странно и случайно.
And then if you look at the ecosystem, we understand that the ecosystem is the totality of different institutions around it. And we look at the set of these institutions, and they sometimes look very exotic, and something that, you think, how will this all work together?
Ну вот мы, например, убеждены и действуем в этом направлении, что мы считаем, что наличие там именно Европейского университета является условием решения задачи по коммерциализации, по внедрению культуры междисциплинарных исследований и новых подходов к образованию.
So we believe that having a graduate university there will be essential to make a successful interdisciplinary approach to commercialization and overall development in our school successful development in the future.
И возлагает на этот университет много надежд.
And we do have a lot of hopes into this open university.
Но не факт, что люди, которые будут делать университет, будут разделять наше видение и готовы будут принять на себя такую роль, такую груз ответственности.
But at the same time, we can't be sure that the people in this open university will share our vision, and will be able to take charge and, acknowledge the responsibility for it.
Одновременно у нас на этой территории уже есть независимая Московская школа управления.
Well, we have alternative options, such as, for instance, International School, the School of Management.
Она сейчас меняет свою концепцию и пытается сориентироваться на сферу инноваций.
They're currently refocusing their priorities and trying to focus on innovation.
Вот уже прошло больше года, и наши отношения институциональные с ней выстраиваются довольно тяжело.
essential elements, prerequisites of this matrix of the ecosystem to make sure that it's both collaborative, successful, and sustainable in the long run. And this is what we're looking at, number 27 ingredients.
И несмотря на то, что я услышал сегодня про СТС, такие некоторые системы ценностных утверждений по поводу того, что СТС самостоятельная дисциплина, она не собирается никого обслуживать. Тем не менее, мы хотели бы, конечно, разобраться поглубже, что изменится в Сколково, если этот взгляд, эта позиция будут туда интегрированы.
And, despite what we've heard about STS being standalone science, with, appropriate capabilities, we would like to drill down into it and see what's what and see the potential synergy between STS and what we're trying to do here in Skopje.
Поэтому поддерживаем проект лаборатории.
So that's why we're supporting this lab.
Надеюсь, что в Европейском университете твердые последователи идеологии СТС их объектом будет Сколково.
I should stress in English once again that one thing which Oleg said, that he repeated what Andy said, that STS is a separate discipline which asserts its stance as not serving anybody. But still, even given that, maybe you guys take a look at us. Okay.
What's the relationship between EUSP and the foundation in relation to each other?
What's the relation between EUSP and what?
And the foundation.
And the foundation.
And the project of the future.
We just signed a contract to prepare people and to develop syllabi and to provide advice on how to establish an STS program in the Skolkovo Institute of Technology, should it decide to have such a laboratory. No, I saw the president of this Skolkovo Institute of Technology yesterday to check with him what's this synergy between what the foundation thinks and what's the institute thinks. And he basically said that his priorities are setting these 5 natural science departments because that's where the main bulk of money will go. Russia should have back its nuclear program, its chemistry, its physics, but he understands that there should be a policy dimension, and he said that's where STS fits. But of course, being himself an aerospace engineer, he wants that first and foremost.
So that's the guy from MIT?
Yeah, that's the guy from MIT.
So basically, in the next few years, you will make that decision to see whether they can fit a science policy/STS program in the ecosystem of these 5 sort of schools of disciplines.
I think it will be a collective decision, not an individual decision, because as we know from the studies of policy making, it is usually spread across a network, and it's not going to be his lonely head which will be deciding. There are many stakeholders in the process of technological modernization in Russia, and the fact that the foundation and the EUSP right now are keen on developing STS as a discipline in Russia, we think that there's quite a serious presence of experts and policymakers who think that STS is a must for the type of institution. Yeah. Okay, so who first? Steve, okay.
I think this is just fascinating. It's really interesting. it's really important. And the first thought I had was that I've come across a number of big corporations who actually employ a skeptic to be part of all the decisions and development processes. I first met such a person who was employed by British Telecom, and he is the person whose task is to challenge all the assumptions which lie behind the decisions and the plans. And we had a good discussion because he is a paid skeptic and I am the underpaid skeptic in STS. So I think, but seriously, I think some mechanism whereby you have the ability to reflect on the plans as they develop and to, as I say, challenge and expose the assumptions which are built into the decisions would be very important. You know, my version of that earlier was to talk about ethnographers, but it doesn't have to be just ethnographers. The second point I wanted to make was that in Oxford, in our business school, we have recently established a major program management unit, which of course has been looking at major program development, nothing like the size of the Skolkovo Institute, but the focus of attention at the moment is the London Olympic Games. And the research interest is exactly what sorts of assumptions are informing the key decisions about how to set up the Olympic Games and make it run successfully and so on. And again, that particular unit is all funded by corporate interests.
Okay. Well, Trevor?
Yeah, this is very interesting, and I think what I have to say is a series of different points. I mean, if one's thinking about this in terms of how can STS help more, I mean, one of the key points, as Oleg has already said, is that there are opportunities, special opportunities for STS research as a research topic. It seems the crucial issue that we face is building a critical mass of STS researchers. You need a certain number to get, the whole greater than the sum of the parts. And it seems, so far, Oleg talked about these 4 students we have coming on tap. It's still, and given the total destruction, it seems, or regress, however you want to put it, of STS in Russia, that one has to think about building up this critical mass. This is one of the very first things. Obviously, you've been thinking about this. And one way of doing that is to get more visibility. And one thing I am aware of, just in our own program at Cornell University, we have 2 students working on Russian topics. So there must be a bunch of other STS students, scholars around the world who are not here today, who are working in a Western context on Russian topics. So some way of getting those scholars into the mix would seem a sensible way to go. I'm also, as well as just coming here as an STS scholar, I'm just the president-elect, I'm now the president, I'm taking over at the Cleveland meeting of the Society for Social Studies and Science. And I know that our society has had a policy of trying to stimulate STS in regions by having conferences there. So we had a conference in Japan, Tokyo. We're planning one in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And a goal to work towards would be to think about actually having a major STS conference in Russia eventually. So that would be something I think that we could think about. On this subject of how, the thing that, let me be absolutely honest about, the thing that scares me most about this is how big it is. And I just sat for the last 3 days in Germany evaluating different German research applications in the social sciences that are all interdisciplinary, and that there was 7 international experts, and we all reached the conclusion that the most interesting institution we looked at was one of the smallest, most nimble, flexible one. And the big one with the more resources was actually doing very uninteresting research. And I don't know if that's a deep insight, I don't know, but that was my initial reflection from this. And I was wondering if there's any way that you could make experiments where it's smaller somehow. I mean, I'm not saying you have less money, but you can use the money into something more discreet rather than have it too big. Big is not always good, it seems to me. Think about it. Just you need to be small and nimble, but you still need to have a critical mass as well. And by the way, you don't need that many. When I think of how the sociology of scientific knowledge started in Britain, I mean, the groups were just ridiculously small. At Bath, where I was, it was Harry Collins, myself, and David Travis. I mean, if we tried to get Andy there, he didn't come. So there was just three of us, one graduate student and two, I was a research associate, and Harry Collins was like the equivalent of a professor. And Edinburgh wasn't much bigger, was it? And York, where Steve was, and then, so some of these places you can do an awful lot. I think that's that British model. So if you're wanting to have news about it should be bigger and bigger, I think the money is definitely needed. I'm not saying you don't need the money, but maybe think about size in the mix.
Well, I think that, thank you for the question, but it's about concerns of STS rather than about concerns of Skolkovo, I think. And I think the idea of a critical mass is a question for Skolkovo, how it builds the critical mass of technological creativity, while you kind of transformed it into how do we build the critical mass of STS in Russia. And the second objective I can comment upon very easily, that also addresses the question of Vincent. That is, we will have STS here. I mean, right now with the help of Skolkovo money, 2 years down the road, we'll have a lot of articles, we'll have lots of research, and we'll have the functioning module here. Whether it will be a department of STS or whether it will be just a center, as all our research centers are, we'll see 2 years down the road. But then, even if the Skolkovo Institute of Technology does not want to create a department of STS, and how can it if we will just produce for students and there are some other people in Moscow? I think Foundation and us can easily agree that within the limits of organizations where the Foundation sees its activities as useful, I don't know, in the Technopark there might be a lab on STS, or somehow attached to the Center of Innovation. If it is attached to the Foundation, it will be another island. And then we've got all these people in Moscow also who might be attracted to the third hub of STS. The idea about the World Conference in STS sounds a bit too big for the time being, but 2 years down the road it might be when we will be finally presenting something, if Russia has to offer something academically. That is our STS is tasty. In a sense, we have, as I said, I'm not sure to what extent the project of transforming misfortunes into a fortune will work out. But I'm definitely sure that there's one thing which Russian STS so far was concerned with, and that's what West European STS or US STS was not concerned until I read the latest articles by Trevor, which is infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. The backbone of Russian national identity is the pipe. Nobody did a study of pipelines apart from Andrew Barry in Oxford. And he did a very funny study of pipelines. I mean, if you want to understand Russia, you do pipes, wires, and huge chunks of all of that metal, which defines what Russia is now. It's impossible to decentralize it until you cut it into chunks and make it governable subunits. And if we produce that type of research, it will be contribution to world science. By the way, one of the people who commissioned this research is Anatoly Chubais, who did not manage to decentralize electricity after 10 years of trying to build, to cut the electricity monopoly into parts. So that's another question. So in a sense, I like Trevor's remarks, and I think there's a promise here. But if we are very cool and tasty scientifically. Well, it was a long day in a sense, and particularly for those who do not understand fast academic English, I give them great thanks for making their bodies suffer through the imposition of the world academic scene in one gulp. For those who never heard about STS before, I also thank them for having this concerted introduction, which reminded me of learning to swim by plunging yourself into a swimming pool without prior knowledge. Those from the STS profession who don't know much about Russia, I'm thankful that they had to bring their concerns to be linked with the locals. The aborigines are thankful, so thanks.